Thank you for that very kind introduction. And in the few minutes that I have, I really first want to thank Australians for Palestine for bringing us all together today. This is my second visit to Australia. I was here exactly 8 years ago, and even just walking in, I met a few people who I first met 8 years ago. As some of you may know, there was a little bit of a kerfuffle, as you might call it, about me coming to Australia. And I think, you know, not to make it about me, but I think the tussle over my visa was really a symptom of where things are in the battle for justice in Palestine, that there is a global effort supported by Israel and its lobby groups to try to prevent this sort of discussion, to prevent this sort of meeting and open debate. But there is a very fierce counter-reaction from a broad and growing community of people who insist on our right to have this debate, who insist on our right to challenge the taboos around Israel and American and Australian and European and other support for Israel that is perpetuating injustice. And I think it's a good sign that the good guys won in this case, and that I'm here because there was a really broad and intense outcry to the apparent censorship. And I think that bodes very well for Australia in terms of ensuring that here in this country you don't face the kind of efforts at censorship that we're facing in the United States and we're seeing in other countries, and that will be a topic for us throughout the day. I think in the other thing I reflect on, that so much has happened in the 8 years since I was in Australia. I was here in May 2008, which was several months before the Israeli attack on Gaza that came to be known as Operation Cast Lead. And since then, there have been a number of massive Israeli attacks on Gaza, an intensification of the siege and blockade, and of course, the aggressive expansion of Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank, the seemingly endless rise of Israel's far right to the point where it has the most extreme government in its history. And we have seen the various pro-Israel groups become more and more implacable in their opposition to any notion of Palestinian rights. We have seen also at the same time with the continued wars in the Middle East, whose most recent origin was, of course, the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, the relentless rise of Islamophobia. I know this is present in Australia, but it's certainly very, very palpable in the United States, and there's a feeling of really great worry and concern in communities there, Muslim communities, about basic safety, that people don't even feel safe going to their community centers, going to their mosques. And of course, this is intensified during a period, as we have now, of a presidential election where Muslims, who are, by the way, estimated to be around 1% of the US population, not a very big number, seem to occupy a disproportionate amount of the attention of media and politicians, and much of this attention is extremely negative and involves very violent and dehumanizing rhetoric. And what we've also seen since 2008 and really intensifying in the past few years is an alliance between pro-Israel constituencies and some of these extreme Islamophobic, nativist and ultra-nationalist groups or political ideologies in what are loosely known as the Western countries. And this is certainly contributing to some of the challenges we currently face in talking about Palestine, because for us, for Palestinians, the question of Palestine has not been a religious issue. It's not been an issue of ethnic identity or religious identity, but it's been one about defending the presence of Palestinians on the land. And in that regard, I should mention that today in Palestine is Land Day. It's still Land Day in Palestine, even though that passed in Australia yesterday. I'm still very confused about the whole date change thing. Land Day, of course, is a reaffirmation every year that the struggle of the Palestinian people is about remaining on their land against the relentless Israeli efforts to remove them, which of course are carried out in full complicity with the United States and other world powers, including, of course, Australia. So there has been definitely an effort to try to recast the question of Palestine in religious terms. And we see this reflected in media rhetoric and rhetoric from Israeli politicians and Israeli media that often no longer even refers to Palestinians as Palestinians, but just as Muslims. Of course, the implications of this are that if it's a religious conflict, it has no solution. It's an endless struggle to the bitter end, whatever that may be. The alternative, that this is an anti-colonial struggle about the rights of an indigenous people on their land, the implications of that is that it has a solution. And that solution is to decolonize and to end the exclusion and oppression and violence against indigenous people. But of course, that has a terribly high cost for Israel. And so Israel is much more comfortable with pushing towards this more and more extreme rhetoric, which has global implications. Things are bad enough. We see the horrific situation in Syria, in Iraq, the ripple effects that have gone around the world with the atrocities that have happened in so many countries, in Ankara, in Paris, in Brussels, and heaven forbid, who knows where next. And we've seen at almost every step Israel being among the first to try to exploit these atrocities. Benjamin Netanyahu rushing to Paris, for example, in the wake of the Charlie Hebdo killings, to declare there, to the great annoyance of French leaders, who, by the way, are no great friends of Palestinians, but to their great annoyance, Netanyahu essentially saying that Jews have no place in France and should be leaving to Israel. So this is all part of the context in which we're working and having this discussion today. At the same time, I see really very many positive developments, and this will also be part of our discussion today, which is that there is, at the same time, I feel, never been a stronger global movement that is committed to justice in Palestine. There have never been more sources of information about what's happening in Palestine, or more voices being heard. And of course, who is heard and who is not heard, it's still by no means a level playing field. Mass media, mainstream media, still have a disproportionate hold on who gets to be heard and by how many people. But that monopoly is really starting to break down in ways that have provided great opportunities for those of us who are interested in a more honest discourse about Palestine, and who are interested in educating and mobilizing people to work for justice in Palestine, which I think ultimately is the goal. So that's my 10 minutes up, and I just want to say in very mild and friendly rebuke that I have been to Adelaide, and it's a wonderful city. I'm very sorry I couldn't go back this time, and I hope to be able to go next time I'm in Australia. That said, the ringer on my phone is still switched off.